After weeks away, I came back to my home and found out my wife had changed the locks. Then I read her text. I found a better man.
My name is James Whitlock. I'm a 42-year-old structural engineer from Manchester, the sort of man who spent 20 years building bridges and homes for other people while thinking my own life was on solid ground. Turns out the foundation was rotten. I'd been away for 6 weeks on a project in Dubai, the kind of contract that pays the mortgage and then some. Long days, short nights, endless video calls home that grew shorter and colder as the weeks dragged on. My wife, let's call her Sophia, had started sounding distant months before I left. I told myself it was the stress of running her boutique interior design business, the late client dinners, the weekends she spent networking. I was a fool. The taxi dropped me at our detached house in Cheshire just after 10 at night. The street was quiet, the porch light off. I dragged my suitcase up the drive, keys in hand, only to find the locks had been changed. Brand new, shiny, expensive ones. I stood there like an idiot, trying my old key twice before the reality hit. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Don't bother knocking. I found someone better. We're done. Your things are in storage. Sort yourself out. I read it twice. Then I did something she didn't expect. I grinned. A proper, wide, satisfied grin that probably looked unhinged under the street lamp. I typed back with steady thumbs. You positive? No reply came immediately. I waited 30 seconds, then turned on my heel, left the suitcase by the door, and walked back down the drive. The taxi was still idling. I got back in. Change of plans, mate. Premier Inn near the air, please. The driver glanced at me in the rear view. Everything all right? Never better, I said, and meant it. That night I slept like a man who'd just been handed a blank check. Because in the weeks leading up to my trip, I hadn't been completely blind. I'd noticed the new lingerie in the wash, the deleted messages, the way she'd started locking her phone even when we were in the same room. I'm an engineer. I observe. I measure. And when the numbers don't add up, I prepare. While I was in Dubai, I'd quietly moved money, updated my will, and spoken to a very discreet solicitor. I'd also installed a couple of small cameras in the living room and master bedroom, legal in our own home, and very revealing. The footage was already backed up in the cloud. I hadn't wanted to believe it, but I'd planned for it anyway. The next morning, I woke to several missed calls from Sophia. I let them ring out. Instead, I rang my solicitor, David Hargreaves, and set the wheels in motion. Then I rang an old university mate who runs a private investigation firm. Within hours, I had confirmation of what I already suspected. Sophia had been seeing a man named Victor for nearly 8 months. He was a finance type, flashy car, rented penthouse in the city. 10 years younger than me. The sort who quotes crypto prices in bed, I imagine. I spent the day in meetings, finalizing the divorce papers that had been pre-drafted months ago on my instruction. Adultery, financial misconduct, the lot. I wasn't angry in the explosive sense. I was coldly, precisely furious. The kind of anger that builds skyscrapers and topples empires if aimed correctly. By day 2, Sophia's messages had turned from triumphant to irritated. Answer your phone, James. This is ridiculous. We need to discuss the house, I replied once. No, we don't. You changed the locks. Keep the house for now. I hope it's comfortable. Then silence for me again. I checked into a serviced apartment overlooking the canal. Nothing flashy, but clean and quiet. I spent the evening reviewing the camera footage from the weeks before I left. There it was in high definition. Victor arriving after I'd gone to the airport, Sophia laughing in a silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary, the two of them on the sofa that still had my favorite cushion on it. I watched without blinking. Then I saved copies to 3 different encrypted drives and forwarded the most damning segments to my solicitor. On day 3, I met with my financial advisor and ensured every joint account was frozen or transferred. The business she ran, financed largely by my earnings. The house, joint ownership, but with my name on the mortgage. I wasn't going to leave her homeless, but I wasn't going to be a doormat either. That evening, my phone rang again. Sophia. I answered this time, keeping my voice calm and almost cheerful. James, finally. What the hell are you playing at? You can't just disappear. I didn't disappear, love. You locked me out. Remember, there was a pause. I could hear her breathing, that familiar mix of entitlement and rising panic. Victor and I are serious. I want a clean break. Half the house, half the savings. It's only fair, I chuckled. Fair? Interesting word that. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've seen the footage, Sophia. All of it. The afternoon you brought him into our bed while I was still taxiing on the runway. The night you wore the red dress I bought you in Milan. Very cinematic. Dead silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. You spied on me? Insurance, I said mildly. And before you start screaming about privacy, remember you were the one shagging another man in my living room while still married to me. Her voice cracked. James, please. We can sort this out amicably. Don't be petty. Petty? I laughed properly now. No, darling. Petty would be slashing tires. I'm simply being thorough. You'll be hearing from my solicitor tomorrow. I suggest you get your own and tell Victor to enjoy the ride while it lasts. Things have a habit of getting expensive when the money isn't his. I hung up before she could reply. Day 4 began with her screaming on the phone. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times. The 4th time I picked up. You bastard, she yelled. You've frozen the accounts. I can't even pay the bloody cleaner, Victor says. I cut her off. Victor says a lot of things. He also has a wife in Surrey he forgot to mention. Did you know that? My investigator found her yesterday. 2 kids. Nice semi-detached. She's not best pleased either. The yelling stopped, replaced by stunned silence. I continued, almost gently. You chose poorly, Sophia. But that's on you. I'm giving you 48 hours to move your things out of the house. After that, the locks change again back to mine, and the divorce papers are ready. Sign them, or we go to court with the videos. Your choice. You wouldn't dare release those. Try me. I could hear her starting to cry. Not the pretty, manipulative tears she used on clients. Real, ugly sobbing. James, I made a mistake. Work this out. I still love you. The words hung there. Once they would have broken me. Now they just sounded like a bad investment. No, you don't, I said. You loved the lifestyle, the security, the man who paid for everything while you played. That man is gone. This new one doesn't pay bills with feelings. I ended the call. By the end of day 4, my phone was full of frantic voicemails. She'd been locked out of her business account too. Suppliers were calling. Clients were being informed of temporary closure. Victor had apparently done a runner when he realized the money tap was closing. I sat on the balcony of the apartment, watching boats drift along the canal, and felt something close to peace. Not happiness yet. That would come later. But the quiet satisfaction of a man who had measured the damage, calculated the response, and executed the plan with precision. Revenge, I realized, isn't loud or bloody. It's quiet, methodical. It's changing the locks on someone else's delusions and walking away with your dignity intact. And this was only the beginning. The days that followed were a masterclass in controlled demolition. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smash plates or send bitter texts. I simply dismantled the life she thought she'd stolen from me, piece by calculated piece. On the morning of day 5, my solicitor delivered the formal letter to the house. It outlined everything, the evidence of adultery, the financial transfers I had made prior to leaving for Dubai, and the fact that the business she ran was, legally, a partnership heavily seeded with my earnings. The demand was clear. She had 7 days to vacate the premises or face an injunction. The house would be sold, proceeds split according to contribution and conduct. Her conduct, the letter noted, was particularly poor. I was in a cafe near my temporary apartment when my phone lit up with her call. This time I let it ring while I finished my flat white. When I finally answered, her voice was raw. James, you're destroying everything. The clients are canceling. Victor left last night, said he didn't sign up for this drama. Please, I'm begging you. There was a strange satisfaction in hearing the woman who once mocked my boring reliability now pleading with me. I stirred my coffee slowly. You begged him too, I imagine. In our bed. Did you tell him how steady I was, how I never missed a mortgage payment? She started crying again. I was stupid. Lonely. You were always away. 6 weeks this time. I cut in. 8 months with him. Don't insult both of us by pretending this was a moment of weakness. I could hear her moving through the house, the echo suggesting she was pacing the living room where I'd watched them on camera. The same room where she'd lounged and sent that cold text. What do you want from me? She whispered. Nothing you can give. The marriage is over. I want the house cleared, the divorce signed, and for you to understand that actions have costs. You chose the exit. I'm simply ensuring it's not on your terms. I hung up and went for a walk along the canal. Manchester was waking up around me. People heading to offices, lovers holding hands. For the first time in years, I felt light, unburdened. The rage had crystallized into purpose. By day 6, the private investigators sent me fresh report. Victor had indeed fled back to his wife in Surrey, held between his legs after learning about the frozen accounts and my threat of sharing footage. Sophia had spent the previous night alone in the house, calling mutual friends who were, to their credit, largely staying out of it. One old friend of mine even rang to say she'd tried to justify it by claiming I'd been emotionally absent. I laughed and thanked him for the heads up. That evening, I received a long text from her. It was the classic script, regret, love, promises to change, how she'd been seduced by excitement after years of routine. She even attached a photo of herself looking tearful and vulnerable on the sofa. Once that face would have melted me. Now it looked like a tactical move. I replied with 3 words, see you in court. On day 7, the removal company I'd hired arrived at the house. I didn't go myself. I watched the live feed from the cameras I still controlled. Sophia tried to stop them at first, shouting about trespassing, but my solicitor had already secured the necessary permissions. She ended up standing on the driveway in a silk dressing gown, arms wrapped around herself, watching as boxes of her clothes, her design samples, and that expensive Italian furniture she loved were loaded into the van. My phone rang. I answered. You're having my things removed like I'm some tenant? She screamed. You changed the locks first, remember? Consider this returning the favor. Where am I supposed to go? I almost felt a flicker of pity. Almost. There are hotels, or perhaps Victor's wife has a spare room. I've heard she's redecorating. The call dissolved into incoherent shouting. I muted it and watched her collapse onto the front step as the removal lorry pulled away. Part of me, the man who had loved her for 15 years, ached, but the stronger part, the one that had measured every lie and every betrayal, knew this was necessary. You don't rebuild on rotten foundations. By the end of the second week, the divorce proceedings were accelerating. My financial position was ironclad. I'd protected the pension, the investments, and a significant portion of the house equity. Sophia's lawyer, a sharp woman from a city firm, tried to negotiate, but the video evidence and transaction records left little room for maneuver. She rang me one last desperate time from what sounded like a cheap hotel room. James, my name is still on the mortgage. I have nothing. I gave up my old career for you, for us. I sat on the balcony of my new permanent flat, the one I'd bought outright with proceeds I'd moved before she could touch them. The city lights glittered below. You gave up nothing you didn't choose to, and you chose him. Now live with it. There was a long silence. I hate you, she said quietly. Good, I replied. Hate keeps you warm when the money runs out. I ended the call and blocked her number. Not out of anger, but because the chapter was closed. In the weeks that followed, I heard fragments through mutual contacts. Sophia had moved into a small rental flat. Her business was struggling under the weight of the legal fees and lost clients. Victor was a distant memory. She'd apparently started telling people I'd been controlling and cold. The usual rewrite of history. It didn't bother me. The truth was on hard drives and in bank statements. I started dating again, slowly. Nothing serious at first. Just dinners with interesting women who laughed at my jokes and didn't keep their phones face down. One evening, over wine with a charming architect named Claire, I found myself telling a sanitized version of the story. She listened, then raised her glass. To new foundations. I smiled. To new foundations. Revenge wasn't the final act. It was the demolition phase. Now came the interesting part, building something better on cleared ground. Stronger, honest, mine. Sophia had thought she'd won by changing the locks. She never understood that I'd already changed the entire structure of our lives the moment I saw the cracks. And when you're an engineer, you know exactly how to bring a faulty building down without harming the neighborhood. The months that rolled on after those frantic calls proved that revenge is not a single strike, but a slow engineered collapse. I watched from a distance as the life she had tried to seize unraveled thread by thread, and I felt no guilt, only the clean satisfaction of balance restored. By the third month, the house was on the market. My solicitor had negotiated terms that left her with a modest settlement, enough to rent a decent flat, but nowhere near the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. The equity split favored me heavily due to the documented adultery and her attempts to hide assets. She fought it at first, dragging us through mediation sessions where she alternated between tears and accusations. I sat across from her in a sterile conference room, calm in my tailored suit, while she fidgeted in clothes that looked a season out of date. "You've turned into a monster," she hissed during one break, her eyes red-rimmed. I leaned back and smiled faintly. "No, love. I've simply stopped being a mark." The mediator called us back in, and I presented the final offer. She could keep her car and a small lump sum if she signed without further delay. She did, fingers trembling on the pen as she pushed the papers across. Our eyes met. For a moment, I saw the woman I had married, the one who once laughed at my terrible jokes on rainy Manchester evenings, who curled against me after long days. But that woman had chosen a different path. This one was a stranger wearing her face. Outside the office, rain fell in steady sheets. I didn't offer her a lift. Instead, I walked to my car, the new one I'd bought with cash, and drove to the canal-side flat that now felt like home. That night, I opened a bottle of decent Bordeaux and toasted the empty air. To better foundations. Word spread quietly in our old circle. Friends who had stayed neutral reached out, some apologetic for not seeing the signs. One couple invited me to dinner, and over roast beef they admitted Sophia had tried spinning tales of my coldness. I shrugged and told them the truth in broad strokes. No videos, no sordid details, just facts. They believed me. Most did. Her new narrative didn't stick when the financial reality became obvious. Victor, that flashy finance man, became a cautionary tale even for himself. My investigator kept tabs long enough to confirm his wife had thrown him out too. Last I heard, he was living in a studio flat somewhere in Salford, driving an older model car. Poetic, really. The man who promised excitement delivered only temporary thrills and lasting consequences. As for me, I threw myself into work with renewed focus. The Dubai project led to bigger contracts, and I found myself traveling less, delegating more. There was time now for hobbies I had neglected. Fell walking in the Lake District, evening runs along the Irwell, even joining a local cricket club where the lads asked no questions beyond my bowling average. Dating Claire became something steady. She was sharp, independent, an architect who understood structure in both buildings and relationships. Our first proper weekend away was to a cottage in the Peak District. We hiked, cooked terrible pasta together, and talked late into the night. When she asked about my marriage, I told her the story without bitterness. She listened, then kissed me and said, "Some people burn bridges. You reinforce the ones worth keeping." Sophia tried one final contact 6 months after the divorce was finalized. A late-night text from an unknown number. "Can we talk? I miss what we had." I was wrong. I stared at it for a long minute, the old ache flickering before fading like a dying bulb. Then I deleted it, blocked the number, and went back to sleep. There was no satisfaction in cruelty, only in finality. A year later, I stood in the shell of a new project, a community center on the outskirts of Manchester. Hard hats and steel beams surrounded me, the smell of fresh concrete thick in the air. My phone buzzed with a notification. The old house had sold. The proceeds had cleared, my share deposited. I felt nothing dramatic, no fireworks, no surge of triumph, just quiet closure. That evening, Claire and I hosted a small gathering at the flat. Friends, colleagues, a few new faces. Laughter filled the rooms where silence had once reigned. As I poured drinks, I caught my reflection in the window. 43 now, a few more lines around the eyes, but steadier, stronger. Sophia, I learned through a mutual acquaintance, had moved south. Her interior design business had shrunk to occasional freelance work. She was dating again, apparently, but the sparkle had gone. The woman who once lounged in my living room sending dismissive texts now understood the weight of choices. I never saw her again. Didn't need to. The revenge wasn't in her suffering, it was in my freedom. In proving that changing locks on a door doesn't secure a future built on lies. I had measured the cracks, braced what mattered, and rebuilt. Some nights when the city lights glittered on the canal, I thought of that first night back from Dubai. The new locks gleaming under the street lamp, her text glowing on my screen. My grin in the darkness. "You positive?" I had asked. The answer, delivered over months with precision and patience, was yes. She was positive. And so was I, positive that ending it my way was the finest engineering I had ever done. The man who returned from Dubai was not the same one who left. He was wiser, colder at first, then warmer in the right places. He learned that loyalty is a load-bearing wall, and when it fails, you don't patch it, you redesign the entire structure. And this time, the foundations would hold.
4 days later, her screams filled my voicemail. She lost everything. I found a way to live without her, and I rebuilt stronger.